Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order, and do you want to ask for roll, call roll?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Commissioner Jones,
Here.
Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Silvas,
Here.
Commissioner Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, we have a quorum. The first order of business is for us to approve the minutes of the public hearing that we had on January 30th.
So move.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion of those minutes from the public hearing? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of approving the minutes from the public hearing on January 30th, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ayes have it, and those minutes are approved. The second item is approval of the minutes from our regular meeting, which was also on January 30th. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes from our regular meeting?
So move.
Thank you, Bob. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Was that Deshawn?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion of those minutes from the regular meeting on January 30th? None. All in favor of approving those minutes from our regular meeting of January 30th, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ayes have it, and we have approved the minutes from a regular meeting of January 30th. Moving on the agenda, are there any additions to our agenda for this evening?
We have no additions to the agenda.
Thank you, Braden. And is there any public input to the meeting for this evening? That moves us to presentations and the staff report.
Yes, thank you. So first I want to start off, I think I neglected to do this last time, but I want to welcome our new staff member, Nick Olson. He's been with us since January, so he is the new Community Development Coordinator in the Grants Division, so we're very excited to have him. Definitely handy to have an extra pair of hands around. And then also just another hiring update. We have posted our third position, our Community Development Specialist, so we're hoping to have a third member join our team sometime in hopefully May. So that will make us fully staffed, and that will be great progress for us. In terms of housing and Department of Housing and Urban Development activity, we will be bringing our annual action plan for fiscal year 2024-2025 on the agenda tonight. So we're hoping to have that approved. That needs to be submitted to HUD by May 17th, and then that program year will start on July 1. And then other grants management activities, applications for our youth services grant program will close on Monday, April 1st. So we are encouraging any agencies that provide services or programming to low-income Urbana youth to apply for funding to support their programs. We will be convening a application review committee to review the proposals that are submitted from the local agencies and then provide funding recommendations for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. So at our April meeting, those recommendations will come back to all of you to approve those funding recommendations for our youth services program. And then those program years will also start on July 1. And then just as a note, next week is National Community Development Week. National Community Development Week celebrates the impact of HUD's Community Development Block Grant. During National Community Development Week, communities across the country, including Urbana, showcase projects funded with CDBG resources and also the impact of these projects. CDBG provides resources to states and cities like Urbana to support stronger and more resilient communities for low and moderate income residents. Nationwide, every dollar of CDBG leverages $3.64 in additional resources that further enhance community development. Nearly 1,250 state and local governments receive annual CDBG allocations, including Urbana, to support housing rehabilitation programs, public infrastructure projects, small business assistance, emergency housing assistance, and a broad range of public service programming. So on Monday, the mayor will be reading a Community Development Week proclamation before the city council meeting. And throughout the week, we will be showcasing Urbana's projects that are funded with Community Development Block Grant funding on the city's social media channels. So, feel free to share those or it's just a great opportunity to highlight the things that we're able to do in our community with our CDBG funding. So that will be next week.
Hey, Breeden?
Yeah.
Just a real question. If the mayor's going to read a proclamation, wouldn't it be apropos or supportive if we as a commission were there?
Yes, absolutely. Nick and myself will be there. You are all welcome to attend. That will be at 7 p.m. on Monday here in council chambers. Usually they do a little photo op, and it's just, again, a great opportunity to highlight the impact of these HUD-funded programs in our community. So that concludes the staff report. If there's any other questions about it, let me know.
I have a question.
Can you use your mic?
Turn the mic off and push the mic away. Had there been any organizations that have applied for the?
Yes. So like I said, the applications will close on Monday. So once it's closed, I'll kind of take a look at the final list. I think we've had 3 agencies submit their applications already, and then I think there were like 19 or so that had applications in progress. So we're hoping to get a good pool of applicants.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions for Breeden regarding items from the staff report? Okay. Is there any unfinished business to come before the commission this evening?
No unfinished business.
Thank you. And that takes us to new business, and there are 3 resolutions, and you'll go through those one by one? Okay.
Yes.
Nick, are you going to do that, or Breeden?
So I'll start with the first resolution, and then Nick will take over the remaining 2. So the first resolution on your agenda tonight is a resolution approving the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium annual action plan for fiscal year 2024 through 2025. So the annual action plan covers our 2 sources of HUD funding, the Community Development Block Grant and also the Home Investment Partnership Program. So approval of our annual action plan is a required piece of us receiving our HUD funding. As I mentioned earlier, we have to have it submitted to HUD on May 17th. So our request is that you forward it to City Council with a recommendation for approval. We will then, in April, go to City Council and request their final approval of the annual action plan. So just as a brief background, the annual action plan every year outlines the activities that the city and the Urbana Home Consortium will undertake during that fiscal year in order to meet our community development and affordable housing goals in the community. So in your packet there, we have a table of expected financial resources from those 2 HUD-funded programs, as well as information on the projects and activities that we are intending to fund in the upcoming fiscal year. So you can certainly refer to that as well. It's not uncommon that we don't quite know our final allocation from HUD during the time of approval. Congress has to first get their budget passed and then get that allocation to HUD for HUD to provide the specific allocations to each entity. Typically what we do is just look back at the previous year's allocations that we received and then estimate based on that. So the numbers that you see are reflective of what we received last year. So we are anticipating to receive $498,343 in community development block grant funding, and where did the other number go? $779,013 in home investment partnership funding. So in the event that the actual allocations, once we receive them from HUD, differ from that, we'll just adjust our budget proportionally based on that. Again, that's standard procedure that tends to happen because our approval process has to come, sometimes before we actually know what the numbers are. But again, the fluctuations don't tend to be very large in terms of the difference between what we're anticipating and what we end up receiving. So in terms of the public input process, we held 2 public hearings before Community Development Commission meetings, one back in October and then one in January. Between the period of February 23rd, 2024 and March 25th, we held our public input period, during which time we solicited general input on the plan from members of the public. During that time, we sent out a community needs survey to gather input on housing and community development needs in Urbana. The survey was sent via several different methods, direct email, and then postcards that were addressed to addresses in our community development target areas. And we also posted the survey on the city's website and on our social media accounts. So we did include in the packet the results of that survey. We had a really good response to the survey. How many was it total?
It was 216 responses this year, which I believe may be a record, at least certainly as far as recent years go. And we kind of set it up differently this year, where the survey would prompt different questions if someone indicated that they were a service provider. So we were able to ask more targeted questions to service providers and the general public, depending on who the respondent was. So I think the breakdown there was we had 40 responses from service providers and then 176 from the general public. So a lot of good feedback this year.
So all of that feedback is really crucial to our plan. Again, we target our services and our funding as much as possible to that feedback that we are receiving. So we're very glad to get to get that feedback. Again, as I mentioned, at this time we are requesting a motion to forward this to City Council. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the plan or the budget or the different activities that we're intending to initiate.
Hey, Brina, thank you for sending this to me early. And I had a chance to read through it about 3 times. And I'm going to just have a question about Mental Health Board, its participation, and are they providing funds for this consortium? And if so, how much? Or are we providing them funds so they can function with individuals that we're targeting that are homeless and et cetera?
Yeah. So the Mental Health Board participates really in, I would say, an advisory capacity. The Home Consortium nor CDBG from the city provides direct funding to the Mental Health Board, and we also don't receive money from the city, from the Mental Health Board, but we collaborate very closely with them in terms of identifying those community needs, seeking recommendations on the best way to address those needs. And so that feedback and that a lot of times the data, the information from the Mental Health Board is very important as we're developing our plan and kind of strategizing solutions to various issues, whether it's homelessness, mental health concerns in the community. So we collaborate with them, but in terms of funding, there's not necessarily a connection between these grant funds and the Mental Health Board, if that makes sense.
Just got, I think, 2 more questions. With the Mental Health Board, I know that they've had some issues as far as their targeted population, and are they really being effective in reaching the targeted population that we're trying to reach, those who are low to moderate or homeless, and the quality of care that they may not be given. Have you heard of this? Have you discussed this? It's going right into another question I have.
I haven't heard of any specific issues at this time. Again, I do know that there are a lot of challenges in terms of meeting this population in our community. It's a very high needs community that requires a lot of kind of interlocking services, and so kind of that's where the collaboration comes in, you know, in terms of different agencies being able to handle sort of different needs or provide different services. So in that sense, I'm aware of just the challenges inherently in providing funding and services to people who might be experiencing mental health issues and also homelessness or housing instability or things like that. But I haven't heard of any specific issues to date.
Okay. I would really, if you could, as we're dealing with this vulnerable population, in particular the fact that almost 67 to 70% are people of color, I'm really concerned whether or not are they effectively reaching that targeted population. I know it was, about 2 months ago they had a big board meeting about this, and the board couldn't really answer. And so if they're part of our action plan, then I think we need to maybe look at that just a little bit. Or in the survey, ask those questions specifically. How many are you reaching, and what targeted population are you reaching as a service provider? Makes sense?
Thank you for that feedback.
Okay, no problem. This is a follow. You want to say something?
If I can just add, the survey this year did include some questions to service providers about, current service gaps, issues they've seen with clients accessing services. The survey did just close yesterday, so we're still kind of in the process of analyzing all that data. But it is something we're thinking about and are going to continue working to address throughout this process.
And this goes back to our January meeting when we had the RPC here, and we're talking about the vulnerable population. 67% were persons of color. And I've been in dialogue with them, and they just can't give me the answers that I'm looking for. And that is, how are we specifically reaching brown people within the city of Urbana? I'm not worried about Champaign, I'm worried about Urbana. And because for me, it goes to the emphasis, and are they being seen, right? They can be, but yet not be seen. And so I just want to make sure that we as a committee really look at and zero down that thing about who are we really reaching, right? Make sense? So my question is, I just made a platform preach a sermon, amen. But my question is, can we this year really zero in on the numbers and who we're reaching instead of the broad sweep?
Yes, absolutely. And just to provide a little bit more detail on that, so this is our annual action plan, which we do yearly. Next year, currently we are starting the process of planning for we have to do a 5-year consolidated plan. So the annual action plan is kind of, the 1-year increment of your 5-year consolidated plan. So during that planning process for our consolidated plan, we'll be doing much more in-depth analysis to that point. We will be engaging a little bit more in depth than we're able to at kind of the annual level, because again, just in terms of timing. But when we have that 5-year planning process, because that's a much longer period of time, we want to make sure we drill down a lot more. So over the next probably 12 months or so, we will really be engaging in that process, and data will be a huge part of that. So I appreciate that feedback. That's definitely something we will include. And all of that will ultimately come back to you all to review and let us know if you have feedback or want us to look at other things as well. You'll be part of that consultation and research process.
Yeah, because as I'm in the community and I'm going to all these different sites and all these different events, I'm hearing this consistent thing that no one's answering that question. And all the action plans, everybody's action plans are partnerships with other agencies, but nobody's really providing hardcore data as far as reaching that vulnerable population. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Plus, I'm a statistics geek, so okay, all right.
Any other questions about the, okay.
Some of this looks a
Yes and no. I can. Well, and I appreciate the feedback. In terms of the home funding, I will blame HUD because it's a very hairy, complicated program. So reflecting it in a budget sheet just. But I appreciate the feedback. I understand. I think what's primarily confusing is that currently in our home funding, we have kind of two strands of funding. We have our regular annual allocation of home funds that we receive every year. That's what you see at the top, the FY 24-25 allocation. Then we have this second sort of infusion of one-time home ARP funding, which was related to the American Rescue Plan Act, which is not a part of our annual allocation. It's separate. It was just a one-time pot of funding. So what the sheet that HUD gives us attempts to do, and this is what the budget looks like when we actually submit it to HUD, so that's why, just for transparency, I wanted it to look the same. I probably could play around it and simplify it, but I wanted it to be as consistent as possible with what we actually submit to HUD. So what this is attempting to reflect is that in addition to, so there's the 24-25 allocation we're anticipating receiving. We have about a $2.9 million rollover from prior year allocations we have not expended. So that's the 3.7 total, subtotal. And then there's the home ARP kind of chunk that's sitting there. So that's sort of the revenue chunk on top. And yeah, and so then getting down into the set-asides. So the first chunk, the home set-asides, so that just relates to our annual allocation, our 24-25 allocation. So the $77,000 that you see set aside for admin expenses, again, I see how that's confusing. We're capped at 10% of that annual allocation, so that's what that refers to. And then we have our CHOTO set-asides for our community housing development organizations, CHOTO set-aside, and then the CHOTO operating, so that's there. So you're correct that... Most people will follow it. Yeah. Those are just coming off of it. Sure. Get down to the... Yeah, it just... Sure. So
Maybe have a block, just have it separate the two, and it would make sense.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Yes, I understand that. Essentially what I did was these expense items under home ARP. So, okay, and I see that one of them is the rollover, the other ones are subtractive. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the purpose was, again, just for transparency, having it as similar. The budgets that we submit to HUD look insane. And again, I try to make it easy for people to, but I understand that, and I appreciate that, and that is definitely something we will take into consideration in terms of future budgets. Yes. So typically what we do during our, and just to help clarify that point, typically when we do our public input on the actual numbers, we keep it specific to just the allocation we are anticipating receiving, which helps kind of simplify it. So that way we're not talking about rollover and talk. So when we did our initial, like our public hearings and our public input period, we were really just talking, hey, this 779, this is what we're anticipating getting this year. So in that sense, it's easier to digest. When we get to this point in the year, though, we have to then start including everything, which then that's when it gets a little bit more complicated.
Trust me, I'm not,
Sure.
but I think that
Sure.
is that it's simple. Public hearing,
Sure.
numbers that nobody heard of.
Sure.
They don't seem to add up.
Mhm. Yes.
I wonder if, I think that's a good point, Chris. I think it is hard to follow. And I do remember previous years how what you're required to submit in those forms is even more difficult to follow. I wonder if providing what we would do as a budget justification, so you have the numbers and then you just explain each one below, which you could do as necessary. That might just solve what you're identifying here as something that's confusing.
Able to be done as a
Have to
There
be a
are
little
budget
bit
sections
simple.
in the plan that correspond and explain what the project areas are. So,
maybe we could just,
sure, yes.
that would,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Anything that we could do that would make it easier for people to let the numbers tell the story without adding confusion. Any other comments or questions about this first resolution? So, we have a motion for approval and recommendation for, or whatever the motion wants to be, approval or not approval. Staff recommends a motion for approval to the city council.
I move to approve the City of Urbana Home and Urbana Home Consortium Annual Action Plan to be approved and sent to City Council.
Thank you, Patty. Is there a second?
Second.
John? Is there any more discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table to approve and recommend for approval to City Council of a resolution approving the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium fiscal year 2024-25 annual action plan, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ayes have it, and we will forward that resolution with a recommendation for approval to council. So that takes us to item 2. Nick, do you want to give us a background on item 2?
Sure. So I'm actually going to talk about both items 2 and 3 under new business since they're kind of related, and the commission can either decide to bundle those in omnibus or vote on them separately. So you may remember from previous years, each year a certain amount of tax-exempt private activity bonds are allowed to be issued in each state. The state governor's office then allows municipalities proportional to their population to cede their allocated volume cap of tax-exempt bonds to organizations to finance eligible activities, such as affordable housing purposes. Municipalities have until May 1st to make those allocations, after which the bond cap would return to the governor's office and they would decide something to do with it. As was the case last year, the city has received 2 requests from organizations this year to cede a portion of its volume cap. Those are from the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or IDA, as well as the Eastern Illinois Economic Development Authority, or IATA, if you'd like another acronym. You have to like acronyms if you work in housing. IDA, just for some background, uses the private activity bonds that it gets seeded to finance new affordable housing development in the state of Illinois, and also to provide mortgage assistance to low-income households. IDA did provide us with some numbers on their mortgage assistance for the city of Urbana, and I believe since 2015, 113 Urbana households have received mortgage assistance through IDA's bond issuance. And then IATA uses private activity bonds to finance affordable housing developments throughout the state of Illinois. It's financed projects in Coles County recently, as well as in Champaign County. So the Grants Division is recommending that the city split its 2024 volume cap equally between IDA and IATA. I can pull up the exact numbers on that if you give me just a moment here. And have prepared 2 resolutions, which we are recommending to be forwarded to the Committee of the Whole to that effect. So with this year's allocation, which again is proportional to our population, and then the formula is we multiply the city's population by $125, we would be seeding $2,404,250 in bond issuance authority to IATA and IATA each, respectively. So that's an overview, and you can open it for discussion from there.
Any questions about the process? And thanks for that background, Nick, because every year we do this, there's always a little confusion about, is this real money? And it's not. Sounds like real money, but it's not. It's just the cap and our allocations, so that makes it a little bit easier to understand. So thank you for that background.
I have one question, and it's going to be around the same flavor, is that in crunching the HMDA data for Urbana, our numbers are really poor as far as persons of color, as far as mortgages. And so I hear this split, these caps and all that, I get it. But I'm really concerned about the lack of access for persons of color. Here, in particular fact that Urbana is almost 47% Asian, you got to start asking the question, why is that? And so that might be something we can ask IDA or IATA rather, and kind of push in, because I've been pushing into them a little bit, but just want to let you guys be aware of it. That's all. And with that, so move.
So I think we have to do them one by one.
Yeah,
right?
the first one, right?
So the first one would be the resolution approving the transfer of volume cap in connection with private activity bond issues, single-family mortgage revenue bonds and related matters to IATA. And that was your motion. Is there a second? Thank you, Deshawn. Any more discussion? So all in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The ayes have it, and we are forwarding that resolution to council with a recommendation for approval. Now, moving on to item number 3, which is the IDA section of this. Is there a motion on that section of the?
I move to approve and send on to City Council.
Thank you, Patty. Is there a second? Thank you, Deshawn. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor of the motion, which is a resolution approving the transfer of volume cap in connection with private activity bond issue, single-family mortgage revenue bonds, and related matters to IDA, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. So that is approved. That is, we're recommending for approval of council. Okay, anything else for our agenda this evening?
Just one last thing. Our April meeting is scheduled, our regular meeting is scheduled for April 23rd. I have received some feedback that that date might potentially not work for some members. Again, we're a smaller board, so as many people as can attend as possible is welcomed. So it's possible that we could reschedule that for the 30th of April, if that would work better. Just let me know, offline, or you can send me an email which date works better for you. Again, the 23rd or the 30th. We just want to make sure we'll have some voting items. We'll have our youth services grants for approval, so we want to make sure there's a good attendance. So if you could let me know which of those dates, if there's one that you prefer, let me know so we can get that scheduled. But other than that, I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you, Braden. Maybe you want to know if of those two dates, if there's one where people cannot attend.
Yeah, if there's one that you can't attend, yeah, definitely, please let me know.
Okay. Any other discussion? Having exhausted our agenda, the meeting is adjourned.